back in 2010, and the legislators, knew that this happened, after the fact. But back in 2010, when the standards were approved and approved by the State Board of Education, there typically is a public input process that is supposed to happen. Now, it's not law, it's not required, but it always has happened, where you put out the standards and you have the education community make comments about them. That didn't happen in Indiana in 2010. What was used instead was the national input on Common Core, of which there were 158 that just happened to be from Indiana that made comment. So back in 2010, the education community really didn't get to have input into that. So, and then you got the political agendas that are going on with Common Core as to whether they're federal or state rights and those kinds of issues going on. And so we ended up with a pause. My role in this whole piece was to not take a position on yes Common Core or no Common Core, because quite frankly, I don't care what the title is. I just care about the standards. I want the standards to be right. And I made it known from the very beginning when I was running for this position that we needed to have a dialogue in Indiana about math. And you can't have a dialogue about math without talking about standards. Number one, they don't go far enough because we have kids now that are taking algebra earlier and they are ending up taking no math as seniors. And they've got a year no math before they go into college level. And that's not good because they don't do as well in the math scene when they haven't had a year of math. You have to have that continuity in mathematics to be able to keep up with your skills. So we know we have to add some things to the Common Core. So we're going to have a dialogue about it. We've got hearings that we're actually going to be doing. That's the reason for the public hearings, because the public really never got to have the talk. But I don't intend to have the dialogue, from my perspective, about Common Core or no Common Core. I do not intend to have that dialogue. I intend to have the dialogue about the standards. So I want to kind of reduce your fears. Because no matter what, the federal government requires that we have college and career-ready standards. And they've already deemed the Common Core to be college and career-ready. So there's the benchmark of what the standards need to look like. So even if Indiana says at the end of the day, hey, we're going to do Common Core as a base, we're going to add some to it, or whether they say, hey, we don't like some of the wording in the Common Core, we're going to do our own and embed it through higher education. No matter what, it's going to come out looking almost the same. So that's the first thing I want to let you know, that it's not an option to go back to the Indiana academic standards as we had them. Those are not deemed to be college and career ready. So we got lots of things to address, but the Common Core is on hold, basically, and I put out information that says it's on hold for what you should be implementing this year. K1 doing Common Core, and the rest of us are doing both, as we should be doing both, because we still have an assessment that is doing that, called ISTEP. Now, the question's been out there, why aren't we doing grade 2 next year? Because what the law that was just passed really does give us the right to include grade 2 next year. But then there's a part in 1427 that speaks to assessments, and that we will have ISTEP as we have it until 2015-16. So let's just play that little piece. So if we say, okay, grade 2, all Common Core this year, when they're third graders, the next year, we will not have a Common Core assessment to align to them. So that's why I made the decision that we are staying kind of right where we are, K1. We have a couple of years to figure out our assessments, how we want those to look, how we want them to align, which brings me to another little part in 1427 that says we cannot belong to any consortiums, groups, whatever, that are going to actually determine for us cut scores, cost, question items. So that pretty much says we're not going to be doing Park. And we're not going to be doing Smarter Balance, the other consortium. So we've got 2 years here to get our standards the way we want them. But they're going to be college and career ready, so they're not going to look too much different than what we have out there now. And then we have to talk about assessments and what it is that we want that, how we want those to look. So just a little play on assessments. In Indiana, we have pass-fail assessments. All of them are pass-fail. And at 5th grade, we don't know students' true performance levels in math or language arts. We just know that they passed or failed a 5th grade test. I-STEP now is really one big test. It really is. It's one huge, long test. It's grade 3 through 8. It's got a bottom and it's got a ceiling, but it's a 3 through 8 test. Indiana chooses to give it by grade level. So we make the ceilings even more narrow. So we don't know the true performance levels of our students. And I know that school districts everywhere have put in your own growth measures. You put in your own assessments to see how kids are improving, to see at what level they're performing, so that you know how to drive your instruction so that they can pass that pass-fail test at the end of the school year. Well, as a consequence, the state of Indiana doesn't have any of that information. I cannot tell you today the reading levels of any students in the state of Indiana because we don't collect it. I-STEP does not disaggregate it. You are the only ones that know the reading levels of the students in your schools. If the state of Indiana was able to actually do that for you and pay for it, we could give diagnostic information to you on reading the beginning of the year, middle of the year, and end of the year on those little assessments, you're doing already. And we'll actually know the growth of students. We'll actually know the performance level of every student in every grade level. And I'm not talking about just elementary. I'm talking about K-12. Reading information is so important. We have to have that at every level. We should not be teaching students that we don't know their capabilities in reading. So we have to have a vision where we can have that. Now let's talk about, for you, you know what that means. When you have an assessment, a growth assessment, you get instantaneous information in 2 categories. You know where students' performance levels are, and you know the number of kids that are performing at or above level. With one measure, you know all of that. There's no calculations. You don't have to come figure it out. You don't have to wait for weeks and months to get your I-STEP information back. You know it right then. I don't know. I'm just going to take a show of hands because it's an example of a growth measure. Do any of you use NWEA in your schools? Well, there's the example of a growth measure, and you guys get instant information back, and you can tell and teachers, everybody knows, here's where they're performing, and here's the percentage of kids that are performing at or above. That's the kind of assessment I'm talking about in reading, language, and math. Separate, because reading's too important to not be separate. We can't have this quasi-language arts thing going on and really know what the reading levels and comprehension pieces of our students that we need to know. So that's where I'm headed with assessments. And the first step is I read